So the mayfly is simply iconic, isn't it? On the chalk streams in southern England, you see them in May, June, coming off the water, enormous insects, extraordinary looking creatures. And fishing with them can be one of the most frustrating activities you've ever encountered in your life, because there are days when there are thousands of these things coming off the water and you simply can't get a take. But if you persevere, sometimes you can have red letter days. And this pattern, the detached body mayfly, is one of those that you need to have in your box during certain times of the year. So let's get on with the tie. So first things first, in the vise I've got a darning needle. Now that might seem a little bit odd, but that's how I'm going to create the detached body on this mayfly. The first thing I'm going to do is tie on my thread. Now it's really important that you make the right thread choice here, because essentially what's going to happen is I'm going to tie something on the needle and then slide it off and then attach it to the hook that I'm going to be using. So you have to make sure that the thread you're using is slippery. Now this is a nymph fit thread, and it's got kind of little bits of UV tinsel inside the thread. So the best way to test is to catch on your tying thread, just 2 or 3 turns, and then give it a pull. And if it comes off easily, so 1, 2, 3, 4, like so, if I just pull that, you can see it comes off really easily. That means that when you come to slide this off the needle, it will come off. Okay, so I'm happy with that my thread works nicely. I'm just going to make sure that's nice and level in the vise. So first things first, just a couple of centimetres in from the end of the needle, I'm going to catch on. Just make sure my needle's not moving. Tighten my vise a little bit. It's moving all over the place. Okay, let's start again. So a few turns of thread, half a dozen. I'm not going to cut the tag end off, and you'll understand why in a second. I'm just going to pop that into my spring at the end, and then I'm going to grab a pheasant tail. I'm going to pluck off 3 strands, the classic mayfly profile, 3 strands of tail, and I'm going to catch that in, leaving a nice long flowing tail out of the end. You've seen these insects for real. They've got enormous tails. Now it's really important at this stage that you make sure you line your thread up past the end of that bit that you just caught on. So a couple of turns over the top, and then go off the end a couple of turns again. And I'm now going to throw in a whip finish. Just be quite careful at this point, because you can actually just pull everything round. But just a whip finish secure. In fact, I'm going to do another one just to be on the safe side. Just kind of steer it around those tail fibres. The reason I do that is because when it comes to slide this off at the end, you need to make sure that everything is nice and secure. Okay, I can now trim off those tail fibres, taking extra care not to cut the spare piece of tying thread, my tag end, that I've left long. Now the body of this is going to be made using a yellow foam cylinder. I'm using yellow because where I fish at the moment, a lot of the mayfly are very kind of creamy pale coloured, and the cylinders I'm using are the FNF. They're just the yellow foam cylinders. These are 4mm. Okay, so you can get these in all sorts of different colours. White is obviously very useful as well, but in this case I'm tying it with yellow. Don't need to do very much to it. I'm just going to trim off a chunk of the foam like so, and then I'm going to make a couple of cuts with my scissors. So first one is a kind of diagonal cut at about, I suppose, 60 degrees, and then I'm going to cut along the length of the foam like so, right in the middle, so there's a little slot. I hope you can just about see that. If I give that a pinch, you can just about see where that slot is, like so. Okay, now what I can do is just take the tag end of my tying thread, move that back behind the tailing fibre so it's out of the way, and then I'm just going to push this foam cylinder down on top so it sits on top of the fly like so. Now I'm just going to use my tying thread to secure that down to the shank of the needle. Just try and keep this out of the way. It's a little bit fiddly this, but it is worth persevering. The reason I'm using this thread as well is to allow me to make the segments of that mayfly body, which is very distinctive. Incredible looking creatures, as I've already said. Just trying to make the tail section here. I'm having to keep moving that spare piece of thread out the way, but that's fine. Just going to check to make sure I've covered up all the yellow. Right, so that's my kind of end section in. Now I'm going to grab my tag end and I'm going to fold it across the top of the foam cylinder. And what I'm now going to be doing is making open turns with my tying thread, followed by a whip finish. So you'll see exactly what I mean in a second. First turn goes in, pull it nice and tight, so you get a small bubble at the end, a couple of turns around, and a couple of turns under, or one turn under, just to form that last bit, and then I'm going to throw in a whip finish, just to secure everything down. And then it's just a case of repeating that process as we go up. Managed to pinch that foam a little bit, doesn't matter that much. Okay, so again, lie it down, open turn, catch in, squeeze it into a little bubble, and so on. Underneath, move everything out of the way, lay it down, and on we go. You can already see that segmentation starting to take effect. 3 round, move that out of the way, over the top. 1, 2, 3. You don't want to go mad on this, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is what you want. Okay, and I'll just keep that tag end as well. Again, pop that into your spring. Now, very fiddly whip finish here. If you can do a half hitch with your fingers, you might be better off doing that. I can't, so I'm using my whip finish tool. So you just have to do your whip finish, but do it really wide. So the first bit goes over there, and then you just kind of make sure it goes through the gap like so, and that gives you the chance to do that. Perfect. Oops, I missed the hole. There you go. Okay, lovely. So now I can trim off my tying thread from the needle bit like so, and now, leaving this still here, I'm just going to kind of gently rock that back and forth and slide it off the needle, like so. So there we have, the detached body is taking shape. A couple of little processes that I'm going to do here as well. First things first, the reason that you leave this in, this tag, is so that you can make that nice curved shape that a natural mayfly actually has. So if you give that a very gentle pull, you see the end just kind of twists up, kind of kicks up in the air. What I'm now going to do is I'm just going to stick the needle in the end of the mayfly like so, and I'm going to grab a little bit of resin just to secure this tail in place, because it's an area that can unravel if you're not careful. So just a nice little dab of resin on there. It does take a little while to do this, admittedly, but it is worth it, as I said. And then cure it with my torch. When I'm tying a lot of these, I tend to sort of sit and do the bodies in a little sort of session. You do, you know, half a dozen or so, and then come on to the next part of the process, which is actually tying the fly itself. Okay, so my resin's cured. I can now pop that off the needle and take that out of the vise. So let's get on to the proper fly tie. Now, the hook for this, the one that I'm choosing, is a Hanak clink hammer hook. I just really like the profile of these hooks. I'm using a size 12. You can go size 10 or even size 8 for these, but this just seems to work. So that pops in the vise as normal. 390 BL. One of the best bits about this hook is the gape, and these are razor sharp, these hooks. And one of the things you'll find with fishing with big old mayfly patterns is sometimes the fish will come up and flank the fly. They kind of see such a big object and they'll attack it. The sharper the hook you've got, the more penetrative that point is, the better you've got, the better chance you've got of actually hooking up. Okay, so back to the routine of tying this fly. So main tying thread is a Semperfly Nano Silk, nice and fine. Colour not massively important here. I'm just going to lay down a little bit of it. I don't want too much because almost all of the hook will be left bare. You can sometimes, and occasionally I'll do this, is add a layer of something like an orange tinsel or even something like mylar around the bend of the hook. My thinking behind that is that sometimes if your fly is going down the river, you know, with thousands of these real mayfly landing around it, why is a trout going to take your imitation ahead of the thing that you're tying up? And the reason is that it looks slightly different. And one of the most interesting ways to make things look different in that respect is to add a little bit of flash. So basically what's going to happen is we're going to introduce that body on top of the hook like so and add some hackle fibres and some CDC. I just need to give this a little bit of a trim. So you can see that the curve of this detached body is going up, so I'm going to treat this side of the fly as the kind of flat side. So I'm going to cut at an angle like so it sits on top, and again I'm going to cut a little bit off the front, it's a little bit too long, like so, and a little slot in there just so it sits nicely on top of the hook. I've still got my tag end, which I'll tie in a second. So I'm going to lean that on top like so, pinch with my other hand, and just take my tying silk around that part of the front of the foam to attach it to the hook. Just brushing that spare tag end out of the way. I'm going to trim that off in a second because it's getting in the way, but it's very important to have it here at the moment because if you let go of it, you lose that sort of curve that you got previously. Okay, nice, I like it. Right, that can be trimmed off now. Just make sure that's nice and secure, and then really lash that down to the top of the hook. Always leaving a little bit of room here at the head to be able to finish off the fly. A couple of turns underneath just to keep it all nice and secure, and kick it up that little bit. There's a little tag end of that piece of silk there, so I'm just going to trim that off. Now, the next part of the process is to introduce a hackle. So I'm using some whiting grizzle, which is a lovely pale colour. I'm going to take one of the bigger feathers, great big one like that, that I'm going to create my hackle with, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top part of that hackle feather and I'm going to pinch off a good chunk, so 3 or 4 inches, and strip away the barbs at the bottom like so. Then I'm going to introduce it with the feather facing that way and just catch in that open end, both sides of my foam body, so that it's nice and secure. It's pinging out the other side. Come on, just push that down with my nail and see if I can get hold of that the other side, so it's nice and secure. There you go, got it. Excellent. Once you've actually got to this stage, this fly is quite easy to complete. It's just that initial stage of doing this body that can be a little bit of a faff. Anyway, right, so now what I'm going to do is going to introduce some CDC feathers. Perfect material. That's the wrong packet. I've just showed you there a Coq de Leon feather, which comes in the same packet. They're very nice as well, but they're absolutely useless for this. What I should have shown you was that CDC feather, natural grey. One of the things that amazes me about mayfly is the colours. You know, when you see them in the natural world, one of the things, their body is enormous. Secondly, the colours on their wings, it's just a real kind of kaleidoscope of black and cream and different colours like that. They look extraordinary. Some of them are really, really dark. And one of the other most interesting bits about it is where you live, you'll get different coloured mayflies. So sometimes they'll have a greeny tinge, or, you know, very light brown, very dark. Depending on where you live is how you decide what materials you use to tie these flies, I suppose. Okay, I'm grabbing 3 quite large CDC feathers, lining up the tips like so. I'm going to flip them round that way so that the feathers are pointing in that direction, and I'm just going to lay them down on top of the hook. And this is a big old fly. Don't worry about things straggling off in all directions. And I'm just going to secure those down to the top of the hook like so. Nice and tall, a couple of securing wraps, and then I can trim off my tag ends, my butt ends rather. Okay, there we go. Now, a little bit of dubbing. Something really straggly is good here, so I'm using Andrew Ellis's Trout Stalker Scruffy dubbing. This is boosted natural, it's really spiky. It's got lots of different colours in. I don't think that matters very much. I think it's more the kind of imprint it makes on the water, to be honest. But I'm just going to pull down my tying thread and just dub this on in a reasonably loose dubbing rope. And then a couple of turns over there, a couple of turns underneath, one over there, and then lift up all the feathers and a couple at the front as well. Just make sure that's covered up. Yeah, that's good. Now at this point I'm going to bring my tying thread back behind the CDC and the hackle, so it sits there and hangs. And I'm going to grab my hackle pliers, pinch my hackle feather, moving out the way of all the CDC and bringing it round the back. So the first turn is going to go round the back of the CDC and also round the back of my tying thread. I'm going to do that 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to move my CDC back and I'm going to go around the front of there again, but also behind the thread. So in a kind of slightly angled turn. 2, 3. Now what I'm doing, still holding on to my hackle plier, I lift up my tying thread and cross it over with that hackle so I can now secure that in to the front of the fly. A few turns of thread to secure it down. And trim off. Now I'm just going to brush all those fibres back and get a good little few turns of threading to secure everything down and put a whip finish in. And trim off. You can put a dab of glue on that if you want to. So there we go. What a beast of a thing, eh? I mean, that's a huge fly, isn't it? There are times when that's unbeatable. You know, when those fish switch on to the mayfly and won't take anything else, this is the kind of pattern that you need. Those 3 tails, it's so big, in fact, it's coming out of the picture. Look at that, it's poked out the other side. Yeah, those 3 tails that you can see here, very distinctive, representing the incredible mayfly, which appears all over the place. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed the tie. It's quite a testing one, admittedly. It certainly tests the old brain grey matter a little bit, but it's worth persevering. If you get to fish with it, I hope you get a few rises. Sometimes you just don't. And if that's the case, don't lose heart. Stick a nymph on. Possibly the Mayfly nymph that's coming up after this video, which will be very useful indeed if they won't take the dry. But there are evenings when the sport on something like this is utterly incredible. So I hope you get one of those evenings. Thanks ever so much for watching. Give the channel a subscription if you wouldn't mind. Give us a thumbs up or 2, and I'll be back very soon with some more tying videos. Cheers.